Right, I think we need to get away from this positivity vacuum that is Man United and talk about something else. So can we
go to great, we're going to Tottenham.
Let's go to Tottenham. James, you were at Tottenham on Saturday. Spurs lost again. Now, Thomas Frank's in a very, very difficult situation. We've spoken about him quite a lot recently. I think we've all said that it's too early to make a jump, but I think we're getting to the point now where the fans clearly have lost patience with Thomas Frank. He's got new bosses since he was appointed. So how long has he got left? Let's start. How bad was it? I know they picked up in the second half, but how long has he got left, realistically?
I think it was really bad in the first half. At half-time, the sort of conversation in the press room was, he could go tonight. He could go in the next 24 hours. They were slow. They were off the pace. They didn't press. They didn't seem to have a game plan in terms of how to attack Villa. And although Villa's 2 goals were well worked, nice combination play, Buendia, Marlon, it was so easy. It was so easy. And they were booed off very, very loudly at half time. And as I say, we were thinking 3, 4, 5, he could go tonight. Now, they did improve in the second half. There's a couple of reasons for that. It couldn't have got much worse, in fairness, from the first half. But also, I think Villa, if people who watch Villa a lot, I was speaking to somebody who does, who sort of said, there tends to be this kind of trait with Emery's teams in the second half. Sometimes they do drop a little bit. They're so intense with their pressing and how much they put into the first sort of hour of the game that they do tend to tire a little bit. And maybe there was a bit of that in play. I think it really helped Thomas Frank that there were 9,000 Aston Villa fans in the ground, because they were making a racket, as you can imagine. They were winning the game. They were playing well. They obviously ended up winning it full time. And it helped, although there were obviously a lot more Spurs fans inside the stadium, but it just helped kind of muffle some of the negativity towards him. During that first half, when the Aston Villa fans were singing, "You're getting sacked in the morning" to Frank, it did sound as though from the south stand, that big stand that's to the right of the press box, it did sound as though there were a few Spurs fans joining in. Wasn't by any stretch clear and unanimous or anything like that, but you just sort of thought, okay, this sounds like it's coming from more than one part of the ground. And also this whole sort of farcical situation with the cup, with drinking from the Arsenal cup at the Bournemouth game, which I think he tried to laugh off as sort of a silly gaffe that, it's gone viral on social media, but no one really cares. The Aston Villa fans are singing Thomas Frank's an Arsenal fan. And it just lends itself to this idea that he's just not in control of anything, and he's becoming a bit of a joke figure at the club. And that's a very difficult position to turn around. And you just sort of sat there thinking, I really like Thomas Frank. I really want that appointment to go well. I think he's a good man with good ideas. I've been fortunate to spend some time with him sort of off record and sort of behind the scenes when he was at Brentford, and also actually when he was at Tottenham. And he's a very engaging presence. I can see why players would want to play for him. He's a really warm character. But what is there to recommend him at the moment? The last guy, Ange Postecoglou, had a trophy to galvanise everyone behind. He went public with it in January last year. He prioritised the Europa League, essentially binned off everything else, the Premier League campaign. That's why they finished as low as they did, 17th. And he managed to get everybody behind this idea of, okay, there's a trophy to play for, 17 years, this is what you want, I'm going to deliver it to you. And of course he did. Now, it wasn't enough to save his job, but it just kept him ticking along. What's Thomas Frank got? What has he got to recommend him now?
Yeah, that cup incident, you're right, it was one of those, it felt a bit like Wally with the brolly territory, Steve McLaren and the touch. It's one of the things that I remembered for. I mean, he could have come out and said, look, I found a cup with an Arsenal's name on it, which, that might have earned him a bit of kudos to the Spurs fans. But Tottenham are just one of those clubs that, Spurs better than any of us, James. It's like they're kind of stuck in this trap, aren't they? That they are measured against Chelsea, Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Man City, because they're a so-called big six club. But their recent history doesn't merit that. They haven't got the finances, or they don't use the finances that those clubs do. But they've got an amazing stadium. They're based in London. They've got a very illustrious history, which is a long time ago now, 1960s. So whoever comes in at Tottenham, are they measured to an impossible standard? Can Spurs ever achieve what their fans expect them to achieve? Because they're not in that same bracket anymore, are they?
No, they're not. But they feel as though they should be.
Why?
Because their sitting in one of the best stadiums in the world, certainly maybe the best in Europe. They know how good the facilities are at the training ground. They know there was a steady kind of upward curve under Mauricio Pochettino. They obviously got to a Champions League final. They finished second in the league. They were top 4 regulars, Champions League regulars. They got used to that lifestyle, if you like, of a football club. And the regression is, I think, an indictment on the recruitment. You know, the squad is just not up to the level. And to ask Thomas Frank to sort that out when he's had one window that they botched, and it is a point I do make a lot on this podcast, but, you know, they didn't get Gibbs White, they didn't get Eberechi Eze, who were 2 of their key targets. They signed Xavi Simons and Randall Colomawani right at the end of the window. Colomawani was injured. And to sort of say to Thomas Frank, right, go and create this great attacking team. There's also missing James Maddison. There's also missing Kulusevski. Solanke made his first appearance in a long time against Villa as a late substitute. You're missing all these players to sort of say, right, now go and deliver Champions League football for a team that was used to losing every week. And there is he got asked a very interesting question a few weeks ago, actually. People talk about winning being a habit. And he was asked, is losing a habit? Does that become a problem, a cycle that you have to break? And he kind of agreed with it. And I think they know that there's a big job on there. And from the conversations that I've had with some of the Spurs hierarchy, there's no appetite to get rid of Thomas Frank. They don't think he's not up to the job. This pressure has come about from the fans. And I do think that's a really important point to make, is that often we in the media, we're accused of kind of driving agendas or whipping things up. This has come from the fans. I think if you polled 20 Spurs journalists or the journalists that cover that club regularly, I really don't think the majority would be saying he's not good enough. But we are rapidly getting to a point where it's very difficult to see what progress he's making in any areas, because the only area he was making progress in was defensively. They were solid, they were resilient, and they were starting to be effective from set pieces, both defending and attacking. And they were really, real problems under Ange Postecoglou. But that defensive solidity has disappeared. It's not there anymore. So if you combine that with the attacking problems, the team is a mess at the moment. And you really have to wonder, if Thomas Frank can't get wins, they've got West Ham at home and they've got Burnley next. If they don't win those 2 games, it's very difficult to see how he survives.
Just on that though, then, I mean, you mentioned about Spurs, the squad. What evidence is there there's going to be a noticeable uptick in performances and results if they do get rid of Thomas Frank? Because I obviously don't want to go back to United again and again, but they sacked Ten Hag and bring Amorim in. There's no kind of uptick in results. They've done the same with Amorim, brought in Fletcher. It's pretty much the same. All the evidence suggests that even if you do get rid of Frank, that you could bring anyone in to manage that group, and actually you wouldn't notice much of an improvement in results, performances, anything like that.
And that is the best argument that's keeping him in job at the moment. It really is. Because there's a situation, obviously, there's a lot of change at that club above the head coach position. It looks as though Fabio Paratici is going to be leaving. He's probably going to go to Fiorentina at the end of the transfer window. That has really kind of messed up the model that they were starting to create. Vinay Venkateshwar had come in. He's the CEO. Obviously, Daniel Levy had left. Several members of the Lewis family have taken on more of an active role in decision-making at board level. And they put in these 2 co-sporting directors, Johan Lange and Fabio Paratici. And now Paratici's going. And it again creates this slight sort of unease and uncertainty about, so who is bringing in the players? Who can we trust to spend the money to change that recruitment that you mentioned, the failed recruitment of so many windows? And they know there's a very honest assessment internally of that Spurs squad, from what I understand. They know it's nowhere near good enough. They know they need to ship out quite a lot of players and they need to spend significant money on that squad. And it's often said that, they've got loads of room with PSR. They haven't made a profit since, I think it's 2019. So there's not oceans of cash there. And they do need a manager who's going to be able to deliver some form of European football so they can maximise the revenue that they get from that fantastic stadium. So Frank is under pressure to get those short-term results. But at the same time, there's that sort of ever-changing picture above him of who has the power and and who has the influence, and a real desire, I think, to not throw out a guy who is a genuinely good man, as Thomas Frank is. But if the fans continue to protest and continue to voice their opposition to what he's doing and the team, and create this kind of environment to such an extent, then I just don't see how they can do anything other than say, all right, we've got to give someone else a go. But you're right, Rob, there's no guarantee. There's no one out there. I don't think that same fan base would rally behind a single candidate. It's not as if there's someone out of work. I bet you a lot of them would want Pochettino back. And it's something that they may look at in the summer if he leaves the USMNT after the World Cup. Maybe that's an option for them. But again, we're talking about, we've just spent 15 minutes criticising Man United for going back to the past. Well, this is where Spurs are thinking. But it all goes back to those sort of halcyon days of the Pochettino era of, here we are, this is it. We are now finally taking that final step to being one of the big clubs in Europe, not necessarily going to win everything every year, but we're challenging, we're there. And they've taken 3 or 4 or 5 steps back from that. And so you can see why they're looking at Pochettino and thinking, well, he was the guy that got us there. Maybe he's the guy that can get us back.
Well, the bad news for Thomas Frank is that Ryan Mason's available again after leaving his job at West Brom last week. So there is an interim there that could be ready to take over. But you mentioned the West Ham and the Burnley games previously. But if they don't beat West Ham, can he actually survive for the Burnley game? I mean, how big is the West Ham game now?
It's massive. It's the biggest game of their season. I think if they lose it, I do want to caveat it with, because they've got Burnley next, and because there is after West Ham, and because there is a real concerted desire among the hierarchy to not lose him yet. They don't want to. It's not as if the relationship's broken down. We're not looking at a Chelsea or a Man United situation here where the head coach is frustrated with things that are going on. They're all aligned internally, and he said that publicly, and that is true. I believe that to be true. They all know there's a big job to be done, but he doesn't really have the mandate or the backing to do it if they're losing everywhere. I think it's 3 wins in 14 games now across all competitions. So it's huge. It's huge. If they don't beat I think if they don't get 4 points from West Ham and Burnley, then I think he's gone. But
just to jump in there, in between they play Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League. And if they win that game, they could pretty much secure top 8 of the Champions League, which would take them, beyond the kind of playoff round. I mean, would that buy them some time if they can beat Dortmund and get into the Champions League, kind of the round of 16? I'm not quite sure what the numbers are, but would that buy them the time that, look, we've got a guy that's getting into the knockout stage of the Champions League, not just the knockout stage, but the top 8. So would that balance it out, or is it all about domestic results now?
I don't think it would be enough to silence the fan dissent towards him. I think it potentially could be enough. It would be something that Vinay and the owners could say, well, look, he's achieved something. Right. This is something tangible. This is Spurs eating at the top table into the 2026. All right. And the rest can follow. But, we've sort of seen already from last season, well, if things are going well in Europe, but domestically your house is on fire, it's not going to save you. So, I think it's all about West Ham and Burnley. I think the Dortmund, look, he can only lose really with the Dortmund situation. If he wins it, people will kind of shrug their shoulders a little bit and say, okay, great. No one in that stadium, no one connected to Tottenham, nobody thinks they're going to win the Champions League. So, all you're doing really is just kind of, okay, great, we're going to have a couple more big games and we're going to get knocked out by a big team. Brilliant. It's not enough to kind of, when you put that into the bigger negative picture, it's not enough to save him, no.